Hi, today I wanted to discuss a little bit about architects being expensive. We've all heard that feeling that, oh, my architect is really expensive, or I'm not using an architect because I've heard they're really expensive. And I wanted to bust some myths around this, and just kind of through real life examples, give you three scenarios where an architect is actually probably going to save you money. And typically that, the value in an architect is in the way that they structure their process, but also in how they can save you some money. So just in practical sense, a simple way that an architect can save you some money and isn't going to be expensive is when they put together what we call a tender package. That is a full set of drawings for a builder to price at the outset. That will include everything down to all the details, all the nitty-gritty stuff that you might forget, door handles, hinges, full package, so you know what your builder is costing, and more fundamentally that he has included it or they have included it in their price. And by having that at the outset, you've got a clear understanding of what your cost is going to be for the build, and within that you'd probably allow for a sort of a 10 to 15% contingency subject to what kind of building it is, so that you've got a fair idea of what your budget is at the outset. Quite often we hear that people go in and they hand a very loose set of planning drawings to a builder to price, and quite fundamentally that just means that somebody's plucking a figure out of the air. And what you get with that is scenarios that builders turning around during the build saying, oh, I didn't include for the 20 lights that you wanted in that room. Well, how could they? Because really it's not on a drawing, there's nothing to define it. So unless it's defined at the outset when they cost for it, it's probably not included. And that goes down to the quality of the insulation, to the final finishing that you're looking for, any nitty-gritty details, all of that. The more that is bottomed out at the outset, the more that can be included in the cost, and therefore you're more likely to save money and understand where you can make cutbacks and where you can't. So that's number one. Number two is when the project is on site and your architect is managing the project for you, it is likely that they have far more experience than you do to scrutinize the costs that are coming in, known as variations. So, for example, if you suddenly through the build decide you want to change something, how much is that going to cost you? Are you going to be held to ransom by the builder? And what can you possibly do about it? Or in the event that something unknown is uncovered, how much is that going to cost you? Is that going to cripple you? What can potentially be done on the offset to offset those unknown costs? And so we look at the cost that the builder would present to us, and we assess it against the original sort of rates and values that they presented at the outset. So let's say that you've decided to change slightly how something is being built through the build, or you uncover something different. We'll look at the labor cost that was previously stipulated, assess that against what's been presented, and understand if it's fair or reasonable. On a recent job where there was, because of the complication of the job, there were a number of costs presented by the builder, quite often in relation to things they had forgotten during the cost of the initial sort of tender package. And we were able to bat those back, and say, actually, we won't accept these costs because here we go, on the drawing here, we've allowed for this, on the drawing there, we've allowed for that, so you should have factored that into your cost. And as a result, on that particular job, there's probably been in excess of about, I would say probably in excess of about £120,000 worth of savings to the client as a result of us being involved through the project. Our fees were not that high through the savings, so clearly we've made a massive kind of gain for the client by being involved through the project sort of construction phase of the project there. And the third quick way that we can help you save things is when things are being built, we've probably got far more experience in understanding what is wrong and how it can be fixed. And by that, I mean, unfortunately in the building industry, we've all heard there's lots of people doing it badly, and we can probably catch it far sooner rather than it becoming a problem. So we've had instances where we've walked onto site with a builder that the client may have chosen. We've looked at it and said, oh, actually the builder hasn't done his damp proofing properly, and we can catch it at that stage. And had it not been caught at that stage, it may not have been picked up by the building control officer, and subsequently you could have had your house all completed, the extension or all finished before you start to see damp sort of 2 years down the line, and suddenly you're wondering, how can I fix this? And it becomes a costly exercise to do that. So when we go onto site, typically on a sort of fortnightly or a weekly basis, depending on what you need, we can assess and say, actually, what's being done there is incorrect. Another really simple example, recently we went onto site and the foundations hadn't been poured correctly. And subsequently, the client did have to take the foundations out, but you're better to know that then rather than after a whole house has been built and you're not clear as to, whether or not it's safe for it to stand up. You would not find that out until a lot further down the line. And our experience allows us to be able to assess something against sort of what we call best practice and call it out when it's not, and put measures in place for the builder to rectify it when it's not. And a lot of that is about, making sure you've got the right contracts in place that allows for that rectification to happen when it isn't being done properly. And red flags for us, really, really simple red flags when we first go onto site, sit around the way the foundations are poured, whether there is damp-proof coursing, whether they're using engineering bricks. Yeah, you'll be surprised sometimes the builder isn't using engineering bricks because it can be cheaper just to put a normal brick below ground. And obviously you're gonna inherit a problem if that happens. So we try and avoid all of those things and subsequently save you money in the process of having to make it right afterwards, because then you're effectively paying for it twice. So there's a couple of sort of myth busting reasons why an architect isn't expensive and actually in the long term is likely to save you quite a lot of money if it's done well. So I hope you found that useful.